All right, good morning. I'm going to stand up because I like standing. Again, thank you to Dorsey and the organizers of the event. Noah, fantastic job filling the room. If I would have believed that I would be here 2 years ago when I started looking at the industry, I probably would have thought I was crazy. But you know, there's a lot of issues relating to the legalities of the cannabis industry, and we thought that it would be a good opportunity to have some of the experts in the market today talk about some of their experiences, some of the issues that they're facing. So I'm going to quickly ask the panelists to introduce themselves and talk 20 seconds about what they've done in the industry so far and the role they play, because there's a lot of expertise here on the panel. 20 seconds.
Hi, I'm Mike Weiner. I'm a corporate partner and head of the corporate group in our Denver office of Dorsey & Whitney. I'm an emerging growth company lawyer, practice in a variety of areas, including cannabis, and we've done a number of corporate transactions for cannabis clients in Colorado.
So I'm Dave Mangum. I'm an associate at the Dorsey Denver office, and I work with Mike a lot. We've done both investor side as well as company side deals in the Denver Boulder area.
My name is Charlie Alvacetti. I'm an associate at Vicente Cedarburg. We're a law firm focused purely on the cannabis space. We have office. I'm in the Denver office. I recently joined the firm. Up until August, I was working in New York at a big firm.
And again, my name's Patrick Ray. I'm the CEO of Canopy Boulder. We're the industry's leading business accelerator and angel investment firm in the cannabis industry. We've made 19 investments in the space and worked with companies to raise 19 rounds of investment and deal with 19 sets of investors. So I can't say enough about how valuable it is to have good counsel on your side. Obviously, hopefully everyone knows that. But what I will point out is that every single one of these individuals is in Colorado. And the expertise for being on the ground can't be downplayed. There's a lot of intellectual property that spins around the states where there is activity, and I would say Colorado is one of the most fluid, business-friendly environments in which to be part of the industry. So, but before we start, I thought I would ask the audience if there are some issues or questions that they have. We certainly have an agenda here of topics that we want to hit. We want to make sure, though, we don't miss anything that is of importance to the people in the audience. So again, the title of the panel is Legal Concerns for Cannabis Investors. You know, if you have a question, please raise your hand, and I'll just scribe down a few. Yes?
So in the last panel, there was discussion about the political environment, and everybody seemed to think that they're quite bullish. But Chris Christie seems to be gaining some steam right now, and he has specifically said that he will enforce federal law. I'm wondering if anybody here can address that.
Okay.
If he's elected, and what concerns that would be.
So we'll put that down as presidential politics and Chris Christie. Any other questions in the audience? Yes, sir.
Banking. Talk about banking.
Banking. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
International angle.
International
Yeah.
law, commerce.
Right.
Okay.
I would say moving of seeds from
Yes.
germplasm.
The immaculate conception of seeds. How do they get there? Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, is there any chance you can talk about internet, like how e-commerce is kind of playing out? Like,
Very well. Yeah, that's a interesting web of challenges. Yes.
Just to follow up on that, we were looking at a deal about the discussion about shipping CBD-based products from industrial hemp within the states.
CBD, hemp, interstate commerce. Definitely an issue, and there's been some solid misinformation being spread about that. Yes.
Can you discuss the formulation of medical grade cannabis versus recreational grade?
Okay. Medical versus rec, or adult use, as we like to call it. Anyone else in the backpack?
Just comment on any thoughts regarding the legalization of financial products and what views the CFTC might take about putting cannabis or other products or futures on exchange.
Okay, so cannabis and financial instruments, exchanges. Okay, Last one.
Anything on the federal front, any laws that are on the table which you think is most likely to pass first?
Okay. All right. So thank you for your questions. Spent a little bit of time speaking with a few of you before the event as well, so I think we have a good list of issues to talk about. So the first thing I'd like to do, though, is to set sort of a high-level perspective for everyone about the types of laws that exist, some of the more relevant legislation that has passed, specifically the Cole memo. Anyone want to start out and just sort of give a very high-level primer for the laws in the United States, and then state by state, interstate, ancillary versus touching the plant?
Yeah, so I think the big picture that we've talked about a few times already is that it is federally illegal to grow marijuana or sell it. That's still illegal. So we are dealing with something that is not all that easy in terms of certainly out of any individual state. There's interstate commerce issues, there's banking issues. So a couple of big pictures. The Cole memo has talked a lot about. It is some DOJ guidance, basically giving guidance to the U.S. attorneys as to how they can exercise prosecutorial discretion in prosecuting marijuana crimes. So it set 8 priorities that basically say that if a state's legal program for marijuana legalization doesn't present concerns for a variety of things, the big ones are, for example, getting marijuana into the hands of children, or getting the profits from marijuana activity into the hands of drug cartels. Those are the examples of the types of things the federal government cares about. So that is to say that the DOJ has guided its attorneys to basically say that if a marijuana enterprise doesn't implicate the Cole memo concerns, it's not a federal priority. That doesn't mean it's not federally lawful, but it's not a federal priority. So that's kind of the baseline we're working with here, is that there's been this informal, non-legal guidance as to how the federal government can prosecute marijuana crimes. So that's sort of the big picture. That was the first big thing a couple years ago, is to kind of giving guidance as to how these things play out at the federal level. It is still a Schedule I substance on the Controlled Substances Act, so that's been the big problem for the banking issue. So basically, if a bank takes money from a client that it has reason to believe is from a marijuana business, that money is essentially, and that money is put into the banking system, that's money laundering. So there's the Bank Secrecy Act, there's anti-money laundering laws that the banks are deeply concerned about. FinCEN provided some guidance a couple years ago about the ways in which banks can essentially get around the fact that it's a violation of the Controlled Substances Act and thereby is a banking problem. Essentially, it requires banks to have extensive due diligence on their customers, to the point that most banks don't want to touch it. It costs a lot, it's very difficult. The banks themselves can be exposed to liability. So, to give a more concise kind of summary here, you've got a federal relaxation of priorities, but it's still illegal and is still a huge concern for banks. So that's sort of the 2 big picture things I'd mention here.
So we are hearing concern for banking, but also very clear it is still federally illegal to touch the plant, and that Schedule I situation touches the entire industry, not just businesses that touch the plant, but also sometimes affects ancillary products and services companies, smoking accessories, vaporizers, etc. A bit of a grayer area there in ancillary, but very black and white with cannabis.
Yeah, I just want to talk a little about sort of the different levels of law you need to be concerned about. So, as was just discussed, at a federal level, almost all cannabis virtually all cannabis in the United States is still illegal. I mean, the federal government still has its own grow, which I suppose is the only truly legal cannabis in the United States. And then you have the state level, which, was discussed earlier. Each state is a very unique market, and you need to be very familiar with each state's rules, because they do differ significantly from each other. And then at a level below that, you have the municipal level, right? So in Colorado, for example, you need approval as a licensed entity from both the state and from the local entity. So there's broad discretion given to local areas to sort of accept or not accept cannabis businesses. So, you see in the eastern part of Colorado, there's there's very little allowed. And then, in Denver, for example, we have a large number of licensed entities, and there's been some discussion about, they had a moratorium on new businesses, and they were going to establish a new moratorium, but they decided not to do that for the moment. They're doing sort of a 4-month study as to whether to continue the moratorium. So, you need to keep your eye on where you're operating, not just the state, but sort of the municipality as well.
It presents a great opportunity for tech businesses to help companies remain compliant and investors to stay up on the issues. And when we're talking about, say, e-commerce, which is, there's different rules about it in different states, you have the opportunity to write in geofencing code into your apps and your software that don't allow people from outside the legal areas to participate in your programs. So we were talking about banking. It always seems to come up. Does anybody want to comment on the banking situation specifically and some of the developments in Colorado, perhaps with the Fourth Corner Credit Union and others?
Yeah, I'll just say, so, right now with the political environment in the United States, it's very difficult to pass legislation, but it's easier to get stuff built into the bills, into spending. So I know that, I saw this in the news yesterday, there's been some movement to try and build in something to prevent the federal government from spending money to go after banks that are banking with the industry. So, who knows if that's going to make it in to the final spending, but, I think that has a much better chance of passing than, there is some legislation on the table. It's not going to make it out of committee, but that would basically allow banks to serve the industry. With Fourth Corner, the real problem here is that, the Federal Reserve, you need the Federal Reserve to be on board. You can get your state charter, but if the Federal Reserve is not on board, you're not going to get access to the banking system. And the Federal Reserve has basically said in their response in the Fourth Corner instance that, not even, I think it was they said that not even the president could sort of make them.
Is everybody familiar with the Fourth Corner Credit Union situation in Colorado? If you're not, raise your hand and maybe we can. Okay, so I think there's enough people.
Right.
To
So
roll that.
basically, the idea here was that they were going to create a bank that was going to specifically serve the industry. And they got their state chart. There's sort of the issue here is that they need access to the national banking system, and they're engaged in litigation right now to do that. And the Federal Reserve responded. And basically said that it's still illegal and they can't be forced to give them access to the system.
And let me be really clear here. When we talk about banking being an issue and you can't bank cannabis cash, that is the rule, but not the reality. Many businesses are operating with bank accounts. Some are paying very high monthly fees, $3,000 a month per account to maintain compliance. Some higher, a little bit lower, others operating under names that aren't recognizable to the banks and operate just like any other business. It's a safety issue, and people are willing to take that risk. But there are businesses, and a lot of businesses that have to move cash around with security companies into vaults and offsite, and it can be challenging.
Yeah, I was just going to say on the banking issue, sort of I put it into two silos. There's sort of the official legal answer, which is that, good luck getting banking. It's federally illegal. Banks are highly regulated, and they're very conservative institutions, and they're not going to take your money. And then sort of the practical on-the-ground answer is, this is sort of an offline conversation, but there are banks that take cannabis money. You're going to pay through the nose through it, and you read sort of advice people give in the industry, which is, you don't want to make obvious cannabis transactions. You don't want to name your company, Marijuana for Everybody LLC, you don't want to rub it in their faces, but you can get banking access.
So just to kind of give some more context for the Fourth Corner Credit Union, it's a Colorado state chartered credit union that applied to the Federal Reserve for a master account. That was denied. The National Credit Union Administration denied deposit insurance. So it really can't operate right now. So that lawsuit's ongoing. I'm a little bit skeptical as to how it's going to play out for the bank, but we'll see. And then as far as the banking on the ground, he's right that it's technically legal. Some people are using the bank system. We've had some clients that refuse to do it because $3,000 a month for a bank account is just not something they want to deal with. So there's a lot of people in the Colorado market that are still essentially using safes and private security firms as their banking solution. So you're seeing there's actually there's an entrepreneur in the Denver area. He just uses the grocery store money order process, and he bounces around like 10 different grocery stores to make money orders. So you're seeing a whole range of solutions. I think some businesses that have gotten large enough are willing to pay the $3,000 a month for the banking. So it's a variety of sort of solutions right now.
Yeah.
3,000.
Yeah, I mean, I should also point out that in some cases the money actually smells, because if you keep cash in a dispensary, it will stink like cannabis. And what people will do is they will Febreze their money to literally clean the money. So I mean, it's a real issue. But of course, it's created its own sort of cottage industry of businesses that help you deal with the complications. Right?
Yeah, and there's a lot of businesses that are cropping up. And there's tons of puns, so excuse me, I don't even think about them anymore. Cropping up to deal with this banking issue, and from an investment standpoint, you got to think, okay, how am I approaching this from getting returns? Am I looking for a dividend for this type of business that's solving the banking issue, or as a security or transportation company? Because if we move and think ahead, however many years towards legalization, does that business compete? Does it exist? Does it continue on? Do you have an exit? So a lot of folks I run into, they say, hey, I've got a solution to the banking problem. And I'm like, great, when are you running for office? Because really the grand solution will be legislated in some form. And in the meantime, there are very smart people figuring out closed loop systems and getting into the industry and providing solutions, or partnering with a bank that's willing to take some cannabis cash. My experience with those banks is often they are looking to fix another problem in some other area by getting into the cannabis industry. Account holder beware. Yes?
How much does a Bitcoin type company bring into this?
Bitcoin, everyone has different opinions, and it's certainly moving and developing quite rapidly. I was interviewed by B2B Trade magazine that was into doing an article on cannabis. And the writer also did a story wrote in a Bitcoin magazine, and he sort of threw a question at me at the very end. Now, what about Bitcoin and cannabis? And I said, well, I don't think 1 + 1 = 3 there. And instantly that was like on the front cover of the magazine, and I was slayed on Twitter for about 3 weeks for having suggested that there's maybe not a great relationship to be built there right now, but certainly people are using it. Do you guys have any experience with operators using Bitcoin?
No, because in addition to where do you deposit the money, which is a big focus, it's credit cards. People want to be able to take credit card payments. Bank loans would make a lot of sense for the industry. Instead, it would really bring down the cost of capital, because instead they have to turn to much higher cost loans. And so it's just not, where do I deposit the money with, though? That's a fun thing to talk about. It is getting access to a lot of other banking products, and in particular credit cards, that I think are very important.
And I'll add on to that, if we're looking forward and saying, hey, if somebody says in 1 year or 2 years or 3 years there will be a banking solution, as an investor, you need to think about what does that mean for the investments that you're making today. And to Duma's point, to Brendan, I feel very strongly as well that the industry will never be this small. Again, it is growing, and there are more and more operators and strong human capital. These people in the room, you in the room here, right? coming in and with interest and curiousness and perhaps making some investments. From a banking perspective, when that banking problem is solved, we fully expect valuations for all the companies to increase because investments and acquisitions can be financed, which they cannot be right now, from the banking system, and that will just increase the valuations of every company out there.
Yeah, and as far as Bitcoin goes, I think the association it has with the international Silk Road, internet drug trade, is something that concerns some entrepreneurs. That you're just making a bad association with your company. If you're trying to be lawful, you're trying to be legal, you're using Bitcoin. That's a concern. I think some people think it's a bit of a thin market for the way they want it to operate. So I think Bitcoin's not as I've not heard talked about it among most entrepreneurs. I'm sure some have used it, but I think most that we've dealt with are either paying high fees for the banks that are doing it, or they're just doing cash.
Okay, can we switch gears here really quick? I want to not sit on banking too long because I think there's a lot of other interesting legal concerns for cannabis investors. Can we talk about deal structuring and ancillary products and services companies, businesses that don't touch the plant versus growers, extractors, edible companies, distributors and dispensaries, businesses that do touch and take possession of the plant, and how you see, since we're in New York here, structures being developed in investments in states like California or Colorado, Washington, Oregon.
So a couple of big points I'll add up front. Those of you who haven't yet gotten in this space, if you do, you'll become familiar with Section 280E of the Internal Revenue Code. You can't deduct your business expenses for essentially conduct that's illegal. There's an exception for cost of goods sold, but essentially it means that what you could normally deduct or expense can't do in the marijuana context. So there's a lot of structuring that implicates that. Essentially, you want all of your non-marijuana revenue, if you have ancillary services or products, you want that in a separate entity. So you end up getting multiple entities set up these businesses because of the 280E deduction problem. That's a big one, and you can kind of start with that.
I'll just talk a little about 280E and 280E audits. So, obviously, if you're saying, a certain percentage of your business is non-marijuana related and hence not subject to 280E, if the IRS comes in and audits and says, a higher percentage of your business is related to marijuana than what you originally said, obviously you're going to have a much higher tax bill than you'd actually paid. So, just one concern, and I know that sort of from an investment standpoint, people are concerned about, do I go into a pass-through, LLC type structure? Well, one concern is if I'm investing in a flow-through entity and I'm getting K1s and there's a 280 audit, that's going to flow up. So you may, and people are more comfortable investing into C Corps in this industry because at least then the audit sort of stops with the C Corp and they're not going to go up a level and they're not going to look at, they're not K1s. So that's something that, you should think about, and that sort of plays into, I guess, besides banking, sort of the biggest issue, in my opinion, I guess it's not really my opinion, everyone else says this too, 280E and just the higher tax bill that you're paying in this industry than you're paying in a lot of other industries. And that sort of the necessity of paying the double layer of taxation, which you're investing in C Corp is not helping that, the higher marginal tax rate.
So just to be clear, does everyone understand the IRS section code 280E that we're talking about here? If you don't, please raise your hand. Okay, great. Just want to make sure.
So on the structuring side, one of the things that I find exciting is that yesterday, or the day before, we went effective in Colorado with permitted economic interests. And that essentially allows folks to invest in the Colorado through options and warrants, or some sort of convertible optional security. Prior to that time, when the industry first started going, we thought that options and warrants would work. And the reason options and warrants are important is Colorado has this 2-year residency requirement. So for out-of-state money, how do you invest? You can't own a piece of the company, you have to own it in some other way.
And these are businesses that are growing.
This is growing the
These are
plant.
businesses that touch the plant.
Touch the
But for ancillary products and services,
Anything goes.
Any?
Securities wise.
Is that legal advice? No.
Security wise.
Security wise, yeah. So if you're investing in ancillary products and services, there's no residency requirements. You can invest in many different structures, but when we're getting specific here and talking about investing in the plan, that's when.
That's right. We were quite limited in Colorado. We guessed that options and warrants would work. Then MED said, no, we're not sure about that. 6 months went by, and now we have guidance, new rules that went effective in this last month that we can now do permitted economic interest. And the theory is either for an out-of-state investor, you invest through an option or a warrant, and either you move to Colorado and 2 years later you exercise, or more likely, because who wants to leave New York, right? More likely you hope that in the future the residency rule will change and that out-of-state money will be allowed to have owners outside the state. The lights will go on and money will flow in. So that's the hope. And so I find it very exciting that now we have a structure in place that we can use to facilitate out-of-state investments.
So in addition to the options and the warrants concept, the other thing out-of-state investors often try to do is they'll just make loans. The risk there in the loans is that if the interest rate is too high or the loan covenants are too aggressive, the MED will treat that as a direct financial interest. So kind of the rule of thumb is that the interest rate should be under 20% and you shouldn't have particularly onerous loan covenants. So the out-of-state people aren't going to be treated as having an ownership interest.
And really quickly, with these investments, the permitted economic interest, we did say that they must be approved by the Marijuana Enforcement Division, correct?
Yeah, I just want to take a step back. So if you are a licensed entity, so if you're making infused products, if you're growing, or if you're selling in a dispensary, you are subject to the regulation of the MED or the MED, the Marijuana Enforcement Division. This is in Colorado, right? Exactly. This is Colorado specific. But you have similar structures in other states. So if I'm operating a licensed entity, any contract to which my licensed entity is a party needs to be disclosed to and approved by the MED. So that means, for all those people that are trying to structure creatively, I can't have a I can't have a lease that looks like ownership, right? Because people say, okay, well, I can't own a dispensary, but I'll buy the real estate and then I'll lease the real estate to the entity, and that's how I'll control it. Well, the MED has to sign off on the real estate lease. And likewise, if you try and this is something people try and do, is, okay, well, I'll set up a parallel structure, right? I'll have a IP holding company, and that will license the IP to my chain of dispensaries. Well, that IP license agreement needs to be reviewed by and approved by the MED. So anything that looks like a sort of a way of structuring a percentage of the profit, the MED doesn't like. So what you have to do is sort of flat fee IP licensing arrangements is what the MED has been approved by. And so just to talk about the permitted economic interest, or PEI, as everyone calls it in Colorado, those need to be approved by the MED as well. So, we've seen the rules, we've read the rules. I've been looking at some convertible notes we're putting together, but time will tell what exactly we can get approved by the MED, and of course, it's obviously like any entity, it's run by people. So, what passes muster under one investigator at the MED may not pass muster under another investigator at the MED. So, just keep in mind the human error factor.
It's good to be a lawyer in the cannabis industry.
And I would just one last point on that is that keep in mind that a lot of these people at the MED are not particularly financially sophisticated, right? They may never have looked at a convertible note before in their lives. So what does that mean? I don't know.
I'll add, so as far as we're talking about people, I'll also add, we've seen multiple deals where the lawyers who are involved in the deals are essentially criminal lawyers who were doing this years before as purely criminal issues. Now they have clients who used to be breaking the law, who are now lawful in Colorado. There has been occasionally a lack of sophistication on the legal counsel side. We've been opposite deals, or we've had opposite lawyers on deals where it's sort of mind-boggling how they're even getting anything done. So for those of you who want to get involved in the space, you want to be careful about not only who your lawyers are, but who the lawyers are on the other side of the deal. I will say some of the criminal defense lawyers that we've dealt with, they tend to know the licensure process fairly well, but the business terms and the business deal part of working with them can be certainly different than what you're used to on the corporate side.
Can we talk about where to locate entities and why many are set up in Colorado as opposed to Delaware or some other state?
So outside of the marijuana industry, even in Colorado, most of our clients who are looking to raise venture capital will incorporate in Delaware. There's a wide variety of reasons for that, which you're all familiar, you're probably familiar with. Great corporate law in Delaware, a great court system, a whole set of legal precedents, so that generally we know the answers in Delaware. On the cannabis front, we have most of our clients have incorporated in Colorado. Colorado has an okay corporate code, but we don't have a lot of legal precedents, and the courts are more likely to be familiar with agricultural issues than they are maybe securities issues. But one of the reasons folks have incorporated in Colorado is because it's clear that Colorado courts will enforce contracts that are entered into by Colorado companies. One of the issues that has arisen in states that it is still illegal is that they may not enforce contracts because the contract is for an illegal enterprise federally. So there's been some court cases in Arizona where somebody tried to collect on a promissory note and the court refused to enforce that contract. So that becomes a risk. Most of our banking deals are covered by New York law, but if I were investing from New York, I would want to use Colorado law so that I would be most likely to go in Colorado court where marijuana is legal and say I want to enforce my contract, which is legal, for repayment of my note or for enforcement of my warrant. And so that has been an issue as well.
Any concerns repatriating money from legal states like California, Washington, Oregon, Colorado back to New York through a Delaware LLC? That was a question that came up from attendees.
So we haven't run into that yet. As we talked about setting up a C Corp at the company level for a regulated industry, I might want to have, as an investor, I might want to invest through a C Corp so that any money that's coming back goes into a blocker entity. There's the practical issue of moving the money, which is if I'm getting a large amount of money, how do I move that? This goes back into yes, I can't use the banking system, but from a practical nature, I can. All of our clients, for instance, have paid us via check, just like any other normal business. We have not had a garbage bag of cash come in the door yet. Susan, our 65-year-old assistant, is looking forward to that day.
It's usually a very nice bag, actually.
Yeah.
I would just add on the Colorado versus Delaware entity choice that if you're going to be a Colorado licensed entity, you need to be a Colorado entity. So that's one of the reasons people don't necessarily use Delaware, like you would see in a typical venture deal. And then other states will have similar residency requirements. You may be forced into using sort of entity choice, different state entities that you wouldn't otherwise use.
Yeah. So one of the other questions or issues, or areas of significant investment is real estate. And different area of expertise, different rules. We talked on the phone before this about a tenant in a building getting popped for whatever reason that's selling marijuana and how that affects the owner of the building. Anyone want to talk about that?
So at least in Colorado, if you're a landlord who has a market reasonable rent that's not tied to profits, and you're just a landlord, that's not going to be treated as an ownership interest. So the burdens are considerably lighter. So that's been one way people who aren't Colorado residents have been getting in the game, is by buying land and then having it rented out. That's been a helpful way of doing it. Again, if the rent is tied to profits, that can start to look a little bit too much like an ownership interest. So it's treated as an indirect financial interest if you're a landlord, and so they still have to disclose to MED who their landlord is. And it is worth emphasizing here, just as a big picture point, that at least in Colorado, the MED will look through any corporate chain. So they want to know who are the human beings at the end of any company. So there's no way that you can structure around that. They're going to want to know who ultimately owns all these businesses. So that's worth keeping in mind. But for landlords, yeah, it's not treated as ownership interest if the market rent is at market and not something totally crazy.
And this is where the banking structure comes in as well. If you own a building, or you go to buy a building and you want to get a mortgage on the building, and the business is a marijuana business, the bank may have trouble or not want to give you that mortgage. So this is another area where the banking system comes in. Not only should the bank know its customer, but it may want to know its customer's customer. It's not always the case, but in landlord-tenant in particular, this might be an issue. From an enforcement area, one of the worries, of course, is that if your tenant is shut down and everything is seized by the federal government, might that include the building? Hasn't happened yet, but everybody's worries about that.
Okay, two more issues I want to get through that came from the audience really quickly. Seeds, the Immaculate Conception of seed, they just happen to appear when the markets open up. What are the legalities around that? Is it a priority, not a priority?
So I think all three of us haven't dealt with seeds directly. So I don't have a good answer, Mike.
I mean, I just don't think that there's a legal answer to that question. I mean, you can't, that's against federal law to transport seeds across state lines.
Fortunately, it's a $50 billion market. They already exist in the states. Last thing, CBD, the non-psychoactive component of, or one of the non-psychoactive components of cannabis, and whether it's grown from cannabis or from hemp, there's a lot of blurriness or, dare we say, misinformation being shared or utilized to build businesses that are transporting products across state lines.
Right, yeah, so I'll talk about that. So, there's a lot of, there's the definition, if you look at the Controlled Substances Act, it has a definition of marijuana, and certain things are considered marijuana and certain things aren't, right? So, I think people who are selling CBD like to take the view, and there's some case law, well, I guess they sort of expand it beyond this, there's a Ninth Circuit case that everyone likes to talk about, but I think that they sort of stretch it beyond what the court actually held. So, they like to say that, well, we're making CBD from the part of the plant that's not considered marijuana. So, hence, we're not subject to the Controlled Substances Act, and we can distribute it across state lines, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I mean, the problem with that point of view is that DEA, the DEA sees CBD oil, which is what everyone's sort of dealing with right now. That's sort of the new miracle drug that everyone likes to talk about. But the DEA views CBD as marijuana, right? So it's subject to the Controlled Substances Act. So any distribution across state lines is illegal. Any use within the state remains federally illegal. So, and I know there are a lot of sort of major players in the industry that are shipping CBD products across the country, and I think, and my firm takes the view that's just not the federal government's not going to agree with you on that. Whether you're right or not is a different question. But
what about hemp products imported from out of the country versus those grown in the earth here in the United States?
Well, the growing hemp in the United States is, there's a very narrow exception that the Farm Bill, FAARM, which sort of allows you to grow it for research purposes, and the DEA has construed that very narrowly, so you basically need to be a research university to do it. So, I don't hold out much hope for federally legal grown hemp in the United States.
What I would add is that on that issue, and almost all the issues related to the cannabis industry right now, I've made a number of trips out here, meeting with investors, raising capital for our fund, and also the companies, the 19 companies we've invested in. There's just a different level of awareness and expertise, as you might expect, on the ground in the states where there is a market and it's legal by the state's definition, and deals are being done, and the expertise of the folks on this panel is great. And
So there's just one last thing I wanted to say about CBD. So, we talked about the Cole memo and the 8 factors in the Cole memo, one of which is dispersion, the idea being that they don't want it transported across state lines into states where it's not state legal. Well, the problem with CBD is, right, if you're shipping CBD into all 50 states, you can piss off a U.S. federal prosecutor in, say, Kansas, right? So it might be legal in Colorado, but if you upset the federal prosecutor in Kansas, all of a sudden, you're facing charges, across state lines, and that can be very serious. So, I counsel people to be very careful about that.
so to that end, I think we're nearly out of time here. Following up on my comments, I would encourage all of you to secure counsel in Colorado or California or wherever there is an opportunity for these professionals to have direct experience with transactions and the laws and the regulators, right, who are in Colorado or speaking to the DEA. They have a different level of understanding of what's going on. And but even then, looking at the companies, and there's a lot of investment opportunities out there, you will find that there are the odds are good that you'll find a deal, but sometimes the goods are odd. The good investment opportunities are usually led by people who have a very good understanding of those relationships with folks like this on the panel, who then also have relationships with the regulators who have other relationships. There's just information that can be gained in those markets that just can't be gained here. So I would encourage you all to work with great legal counsel informed in the industry. So is that our time's up?